Voi siete tutti benvenuti all'Accademia Britannica. You're very welcome, all of you, to the British School of Rome. This is the first public event of our new academic year, and we couldn't get off to a more exciting and more original start. This event, which I'm delighted to introduce, is part of the ongoing programme on architecture and creative process, which is curated by Marina Engel. And before I say anything else, I'd like to thank Marina very much for all that she has done, both last year and this year, to bring this programme together. In this programme, we're hoping to explore ways in which architects and other disciplines collaborate and cooperate together in many different ways and for many different reasons. We've been very excited to see, because last year, and I know some of you at any rate have followed this programme through, the different ways in which architecture can demonstrate itself to be a pivotal discipline within the academy and within the world of art. And it's that positioning of architecture between so many things that is one of the reasons why architecture remains a critical discipline for the British School at Rome. And I think it's rather nice, since the British School at Rome describes itself in its mission as a bridge, since architecture operates in some ways as a way between things that we have outside a bridge. So it's a very nice metaphor for our activities. The two protagonists of this evening's presentation are both in different ways known well to the British School of Rome. We invited Richard Deacon to lecture and exhibit at the school a few years ago, I think 21, so we were delighted, absolutely delighted to see you here again. Eric Parry is one of our trustees and has for several years supported the British School at Rome, and I would also say supported me in my activities here. So it's wonderful to have you both here at the British School. It would obviously be impossible for any event that the British School at Rome does to take place without the support of many friends and colleagues within the city. And it's a great pleasure that the chair of our discussion this evening is my friend and colleague, the director of the Villa Medici, Eric Deacon. Eric and I arrived at more or less the same time, I think, in the city as directors, and it's been a great pleasure to work together and see collaborations develop, particularly around the work we've done in architecture. Eric, thank you both for your collegiality and friendship, and also for being with us this evening. And Eric has a wonderful show at Villa Medici at this point in time, so you can move from the joy of meeting architecture to the misery of Baroque art at the Villa Medici, which is, I think, the topic of that particular show. It's not at all depressing, an uplifting show. And apart from the support of colleagues within the city of Rome, we also rely enormously on friends and sponsors. This programme is particularly dependent on outside support, and we're very grateful publicly to express our thanks to the Bryan Guinness Charitable Trust, the Cochemé Charitable Trust, the John S. Cohen Foundation, Wilkinson, Eyre, and also to acknowledge the support of the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, as well as the Villa Medici as an institution. So I'm very grateful to those, and I'm particularly grateful to Allford, Monaghan and Morris, who, apart from their own success working at King's Cross, which has been the subject of another previous architecture series of events here at the British School of Rome and elsewhere, have also supported this event. So before I ask Simon Allford to come and say a few words, I would like to invite everybody to thank all of those who have supported this show, and to thank those who are here with us, and to thank Marina for organising it. So thank you to you. You are definitively not here to listen to me, So I will, with pleasure, pass to Simon Allford to say a few words to begin our process, our creative process this evening. Thank you, Simon.
You're definitively not here to listen to me either, so I'll keep it very brief. Just to contextualise it, I'm an architect, I work in London, I work elsewhere in Europe and in America. I've come here tonight to see the exhibition, to listen to the conversation. I'm also tomorrow going with some Roman architects to building Mars that they've painted in Bologna. And I think what's marvellous about this school is this idea of exchanging ideas and kind of exposing conversations that go in one place to another place, and the differences between those places, those conversations over time, culturally, and of the moment. Richard is known as a sculptor who described himself as a fabricator. Eric is an architect who could also be described as a fabricator. That seems quite strange. I suppose at the moment we live in a world of ideas, and often the kind of creative process is about ideas mapped out and then executed by others. I think tonight will be a tale about collaboration, about two people collaborating, but also about the fact that their interest is in making. The actual process of making, the studio work, the drawings, the engagement with the people who make the pieces of the projects that you will see and that we've seen outside. It's about 3 minus 2 becoming 1, a witty commentary on the kind of resilience needed to deliver a project and get a collaboration across probably a 20-year period. Eric and Richard have been discussing ideas. The project that they have actually realised beyond, I mean, an idea is a realisation of a project, but the project they've actually built is quite a remarkable piece of new architecture in London. It's in a part of London where we retain facades and make new buildings. And here there's an interesting tension between the facade itself becoming the building in a way, and it's not impossible in the future that the facade might be retained, the building behind might leave. So it's kind of an interesting idea about the facade being an architecture of depth and richness itself, a tale of collaboration, and in conservative London, a tale of kind of vivid contrasts. Eric told me the story that at the opening, Richard wore a baseball cap that he doffed when the Cornice was being kind of revealed, and on it said "No fear." And let me assure you, you need to have no fear if you were to build something like this in London. And for that, we're eternally grateful. So, Eric and Richard, thank you very much indeed.
Okay. First, just to say a few words as Director of the French Academy in Rome, to say that I'm particularly pleased to chair this discussion, but that I'm also very pleased to help in some ways in what we can do at the French Academy in Rome, this program, because I think it's particularly interesting and relevant also for us and for our fellows. So I'm very happy about that. And I don't know what the relationship between our discussion today is with the exhibition that we have. It's not only about misery and poverty, but it's also about vices. Maybe this has more to do with what we're going to talk about. There might be something that we're dealing with here, which is some kind of thing that happens between practices that are normally thought of as separated and which are actually being mixed. And to a modernist view, at least, this is one of the worst vices you can find, having architecture mixing with fine arts and sculpture mixing with architecture. Normally things have to be completely separated. I'm not going to introduce our two guests because you know them and you have the presentation on your, at the entrance if you need to know more, and you can always look through various books and websites and things like that. And what we're going to do, if you agree, is that we're going to look at a PowerPoint together. The idea being that the architect and the sculptor, if we may phrase it that way, are going to comment on some of the images that we're going to see, and I'm going to be interrupting them sometimes to ask them questions. And yeah, depending on how things go. Normally, it should be fine. The only thing I want to say is that obviously we are speaking about two artists who started their public work basically at the same time, end of the 70s, early 80s, let's say. I mean, I very roughly, seen from our perspective, it's quite similar, even though the dates are more precise than that. Early 70s, some stuff and shows by Richard and Eric. You started your own practice in '83, so there's a small gap, but not that much.
Actually, I discovered Eric and I were at the Royal College together at the same time.
Okay,
so he was in a department called Environmental Design, and I was in a department called Environmental Media. So we did have something in common, environmental. And actually, we probably could have shared the lift together, since environmental design was on one side of the 6th and 7th floor of the Darwin building, and environmental media was on the other side. So it could well be that Eric and I got out of the lift and he turned right and I turned left at various times, unbeknownst to each other. So our paths had undoubtedly crossed at the end of the 70s, in the mid-70s.
So what we're going to see is when the paths actually crossed around projects. We're going to look at nearly 18 years, or a little bit more than 18 years of projects together. You have some images of the projects and a model in the exhibition room. But what we are going to do is to focus on these three projects. Two of them unbuilt, or not built as joint projects. We'll speak about typology afterwards, but maybe we can speak about how it started. When I was speaking about this meeting with Richard Deacon, he told me that he found that Eric was a very particular architect in the sense that he's interested in visual arts. Not in the sense exactly that he's interested in visual arts, because that's fairly common, but that he's also interested in sharing things with visual artists when working on a building. And that's a little bit different, because we all know many architects who prefer to be artists themselves rather than speak with visual artists. And maybe the first question, and maybe it's going to be helped by images, is to understand how your collaboration began. How did you, who had the idea of working with the other? How did it work?
To my knowledge, the first occasion, apart from knowing Richard's work, was actually a marriage made by others.
That's correct.
Yeah, for the Millennium Bridge competition. So that's the first time our paths have really crossed, and perhaps I should run into that project, Eric, just to kind of get the ball rolling in terms of the paths. And what I'm going to do,
Eric's right, that it was a marriage made by others. The thing that I can't remember is who on earth decided that Eric and I could be a team together. I mean, that was there's a slight mystery at the beginning as to why someone thought that I should be paired with Eric. Perhaps Eric just talked a little bit about before Eric goes into talking about the project. When they were building Tate Modern, there was also a project for building the Millennium Bridge, and the rules of the competition were that the proposals for the bridge should be made by a team of artists, of an artist paired with an architect. And for some reason or other, some benign influence, I have really no idea at this point who it was, suggested that Eric and I would be a good combination. So that's good.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. It's the interesting thing is, in a way, the context for that bridge. It was. I think it's very interesting for cities more generally, but in introducing these three projects, I will just talk about the urban condition which led to the collaboration, in a sense. And Richard can talk more, obviously, in detail about the manifestation of the collaboration. But in this instance, I think it is fascinating from the point of view of the regeneration of an entire district of London, which we would take for granted. And I guess we could be talking about Bilbao, we could be talking about other cities, but the decision, this first image actually shows this is London Bridge. So to get to the Millennium Bridge, you have to go to the east. But one has to be reminded of the terrible circumstances in which bridges have kind of existed in the City of London anyway, where the traffic engineer completely rules. So you have the railways, you have the passages, and actually what one forgets is that underneath this is the Roman Bridge. And before that, the most famous bridge, London Bridge, is falling down, that extraordinary built, inhabited bridge. And this project was one of, this little obelisk here that is leaning, was one of 10 interventions. It was not about a master plan, it was about rejuvenation of points, the biggest of which was ultimately the Tate. And the bridge we worked on, which you see now manifest with the model outside, was our competition entry. The one that won was Norman Foster with Anthony Caro and with Arabs. And as I put it in my text, it's extraordinary how the artist has been relegated to a small threshold. The architect kind of disappeared from the stage when the bridge began to wobble. And Arabs have made a fantastic career out of very, very sophisticated bridges as a result, because they had to rectify it. Our bridge was actually a trialogue, if I could call it that, between Albert Taylor, who I'm delighted is here tonight, of Adams Cara Taylor, now an extremely eminent engineering firm in London, and Richard and myself. And we just went, this beautiful letter of Richard's actually, which talks about the center of the bridge, the arch, which we started to define, splitting the bridge like a coin in a slot machine. And I think Richard will come back to that. I don't want to say more, but this project had for me an incredible importance in that it was the first time in London building anything of significance in a public space. And I made this out of 25 blocks of key, i.e. beautifully cut masonry, stereometric blocks of Portland stone that are close tension on the lean. And it has a bearing on the next project, which I won't go into. But now, of course, we have right next to this the Shard, Renzo Piano Shard, with its fantastic point. And there's something extraordinary if you read T.S. Eliot about London Bridge, about the kind of melancholy of arrival, the huge flood of humanity that comes over the bridge every day. And so I think the bridge is, in its essence, a very, very critical point, and I think Christopher's point is well made. Philosophically, it's a really interesting conundrum, the binding of two sides. Do you want to say more about the bridge before we go on?
The bridge structure which dominates, which is the the big model gallery next door is a post hoc realization. It's just been made for this exhibition. The original ideas for the bridge were all present, and a set of drawings and proposals, but not fully calculated. Both Eric and I and Albert felt that this exhibition provided an opportunity to actually to tell them what they missed. Because it's a good idea, this bridge. It's a really great idea, and it wouldn't have wobbled. So thanks to Eric and to the model is kind of interesting anyway, because it's that the sort of network structure, which is made by a printing process, a prototype printing process. So in a way, the model could perhaps have been realized in '96. Certainly not with the same elegance, but it was because that skeletal that network would have had to be constructed rather than printed. So that the exhibition not only goes back to the collaboration, but also gives us the opportunity to prove that it could work.
Can we stay on with the bridge?
Yeah.
Sorry. No, I don't know if you wanted to add something about the bridge, but I'd rather stay a little bit longer on the bridge. So Richard, it was your first collaboration with an architect, or did you work before? And I mean, what my question leads to is to understand exactly how did you work on that project? Because it seems to me that if I see the model, if I see the small sketches, that from the start there's no idea that the sculptor would only be someone who adorns a pre-existing structure, and that there's a work that leads back, I mean, for what I know of Richard's work, to other projects which have this kind of I don't know, spatial aspect in them, the lattice aspect, or something like that. I can see the connection formally with both your previous works, but at the same time I feel it's very different. Can you explain maybe how, even in a very, if you remember precisely, we all know, even as an academic, when you have to work in a team, there's always one who has to give the first idea, and then it evolves from there. And at the end, you have the feeling that it's really a teamwork, but there's some way to get started. And I'm an art historian, so I'm more a visual arts historian. I'm maybe more familiar with Richard's work, but I feel that, you know, after minimal art, any sculptor had to take architecture into account. It was impossible not to take architecture into account in some ways, because sculpture was meant to be finished, and Richard, of the generation, restarted things on that level. So I know there's this connection, but I want to know more about the specifics of the project.
I think we had probably 3 workshops, and we produced at the end a set of kind of sketch drawings plus and a very nice calculation that Albert made. But it stemmed, I would say that the question of the ends of the bridge, they came to a Y from interesting directions on which is actually was intended for the Tate side, the south side. But I think this idea of a framework through which you travelled to get to the central section was absolutely Richard's. And I think Richard had he had a stocking actually. He arrived with the stockings, right?
There was a little toy that constructed of nylon mesh that kids were playing with in the playground, and the nylon mesh. The way that the kids played with it was that they kind of rolled it up and then they put it on their hand and just started unrolling it, unroll it, so it spring off like an animal. But actually, the tension in the mesh gave a structure to this little piece of mesh, and that's the kind of seed of the structural idea that within this thing there is the possibility that a tension network could support the bridge.
The story I like is that actually Richard sent this toy because he couldn't find it in his archive, which is very complete, I found. He sent this toy to Anish Kapoor, and that's true. That's true. And Anish then, creates this extraordinary structure.
Oh no, he'd already done that.
Had he? Okay. So no, but anyway, this is it's wonderful. So that's something I'm not party to, but the conversation spins out, I think, in a very interesting way. The orientation, I was going to say, is an interesting one. I don't think it was terribly clever, and I think that was probably my idea. And the little red drawing on the wall, I think, is my hand.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So that bifurcation was something that was like a complication, and it's not necessarily for the better, but the genesis is clear.
Actually, makes the stability much better.
So the bifurcation of the bridge central section, I'm thinking of the bifurcation of the south thing as well.
It makes it much better, because you have 3-point support, and so the chances of so it's like a Lobi ladder. And the ladders for the Lobi tribe in Upper Volta have basically Y-shaped sticks. And it's the top of the Y, so the ladder just has 3-point support from that. And on the bridge, it's that 3-point support, which I think gives it, now might disagree, which makes it much stronger.
Let's give Albert a microphone, actually, because there was, having been a huge admirer of Richard's structure, the intuitive process meets the rational one here.
I think Richard is correct. I think the whole idea of one of the issues of the bridge of descendants was to deal with the lateral stability, which is one of the problems we learned. And by actually having a bifurcation, and also both the central one and the ones in the support allows it to be an extremely rigid element. But from my memory, one of the other conversations we had when we were in the workshop was to do with this mesh effect. That it had to be a mesh effect that was part of the structure of the bridge that actually worked with the bridge rather than just being this phenomenon.
So what I find very striking, if we're thinking, I'm trying, maybe at the end we'll have a typology of the 3 works, is that with this work, you start your collaboration around a question of structure, and not about a question of image or adornment, but really a question of structure. And I think it's very interesting to see that an architect and a visualist collaborating can collaborate on that aspect first and not on others. The others will come afterwards, I guess.
Yeah. Shall I pass on to the next?
That was meant to be my smooth transition.
It's very smooth, very good. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah. By way of introduction to the context again, London is made out of a series of estates, and the Georgian Square is very much part of that tradition. So squares that start as a domestic square and then have, in certain cases, transformed. This one is a Lake Georgian square near the City of London, which is the skyline of which has completely changed from this image. And it used to have 150 doors or something like that to it, which had been reduced since the early 20th century to about 15. Bloomberg on one side, and so on. And our job as an architect, in some respect, or the opportunity arises out of the desire of developers. So the next two projects, kind of ordinary buildings. They're not great art museums. They're just part of the city fabric. But the job was to actually take a building that's reasonable but had really been hacked about on this side, to get permission for the owners of both of these to create a single building. The problem was to manifest a civic building that had a 55-metre facade, or 1/2 of the square, and to create a modern office building behind it. It was actually easier said than done, because the planning process is very tricky. There had been a scheme before that had kind of tried to adapt the historic architecture, and I claimed that. I claimed the depth of the wall, behind which I said I would make a very pragmatic floor plan with an entrance that naturally wanted to be to the single building at the centre. And it was actually an anger with the way that people were using stone. I mean, there's a very good Lutyens building here, and there's some good 20s buildings, but generally, stone tends to be treated these days like bathroom tiling. It's just applied to the building. And my proposal was to make a building that had load-bearing stone, as a friend of mine called it, high-tech Stone Age. That is to say, there's no steelwork to the building. So all the load that is coming 16 meters to the surface would be carried floor by floor through the building, which creates the difference between the thickness of this ground floor here. And as it goes up, you can see there is just an opening up of the structure, which reflects the lightening of the load as you go to the top. And to make the entrance clear, as you can see actually quite nicely on the Hélène Binet's photograph outside, all I did was to twist the piers round at the entrance, which creates a darker shadow. So there's no real canopy or kind of explanation, kind of description of the entrance in an explicit way on the facade. It's recessive. When you're in the building, it's glass behind this, but you see the stone. So you see the way it's built. They're all made of 4 blocks of solid stone with 2 stainless steel bars inside, and a bridge bearing on the top and the bottom, because there's flexes. And you clean the glass by walking behind the stone, and you collect the water from the horizontals here. Now, if you think that each piece of precast concrete is made to measure with a stool and so on, which I'll show you in a minute, you can see there's a certain tension in the detailing, which is very precise. The idea was that it would be tripartite, so that effectively there would be a gathering here at this point, which drew the eye down diagonally to the entrance. And it was always in this little section that I saw, in fact, maybe it even started earlier, maybe there was the opportunity for sculpture, and I think that in the early stage, before this drawing was done, we had got to the point of Richard's involvement, so ground, first, second, third. So it was in this territory here where the piers were intentionally made rather lighter, that was Richard's positioning for his piece. And I should hand over to you. Unless you want to...
No, to ask a question?
Yeah.
I would ask a question first. Yeah. I mean, the building itself is, as you showed, without any involvement by Richard. So, I mean, to go maybe, and we'll go backwards afterwards, but why did you need Richard in this building if finally you don't have any piece of sculpture by Richard in the building, and it's a great building, and it got an award, if I'm not wrong. And so what was the idea? Why do you need, at one point, the presence of someone else being Richard specifically? Maybe the question is rude, I don't know.
No, that's fine.
Actually, I can answer that. I think the connection is to do with structure. The bridge design, as Eric has brought out, was to do with where the artist and the architect came together, was in relationship to structure. When Eric talked to me about this building, it is structurally extremely interesting. That he should make a building out of load-bearing stones. The wall is not a curtain wall, but it's a load-bearing wall, and the building doesn't need me, but I can celebrate it. And so that it was that idea that I could celebrate this this structure that I found extremely fascinating and radically conservative, if you like, and slightly kind of obtuse and determined to demonstrate the potentiality within a very traditional means of building. That all of the masons involved in building making stone blocks. It was that act of building that I was celebrating, or that I thought about as celebrating. So that was that notion that I was yes, adorning the building, but adorning the building with a specific intent, which was where I started from. So that it was I also have long been interested in incorporating something into the building. But in this sense, it seemed like it was making a kind of offering up to the building. And when I came to think about the ideas, in relationship to the point on the facade, I did think about stringing something like a string of beads around it. So this is the first drawing, but the root of that, the source of that is twofold. There's this painting that I've been looking at for a long time, which is a Poussin, and it's very apropos for Roman audience. This is somewhat south of Rome, and it's a landscape of a man killed by a snake. And the critical bit's down here, the body down here, and this is Poussin's painting as a result of seeing or being experiencing a plague of snakes in the marshes. So that the painting works very interestingly by transferring information across the painting from this kind of very violent incident here to the man who can see going on, and the woman uncertainty here, until you arrive at the back to a lake in which nothing's happening. So that, but this image of the snake around the stiff body, this muscular snake, is an image that I've looked at from various.
Yeah. Sorry. Right, yes.
So we're looking here.
Yeah.
So it's a dark painting. The sculpture I made in 98, just before uses that image quite strongly. So that's one part of it. This sort of set of undulating curves going around something was a part of it. But at the same time, I'd also been working on an exhibition that was at the Tate Gallery in Tate Britain in 2001 of medieval sculpture, where I designed the installation, and together with Philip Lindley, the medieval historian, went and visited a lot of the remaining medieval sculptures. And one of the things that I saw quite often was that there were still shrines that were venerated, particularly Marian shrines, where there was maybe just the offering of a basket of flowers or something on the. Somehow the snake and the idea of veneration got mixed up, and I began to think that the way to celebrate this this building was through through this veneration and this string of beads that was offered up to the building was intended to do that. These are more or less the drawings from that, and the model is outside. So now I'm going to pass it back to Eric to describe actually the structure.
I have to say that these are just showing the unusual character of the construction, which had to be floor by floor. And just, I think there is an incredible excitement. I get you see a piece like yours, there's this kind of tension of the structural tension in Richard's work on the one hand that is completely compelling. I suppose as an architect, I get a huge pleasure out of the tectonic nature of building and the extraordinary power, the scale of building. If you've been to an ancient, ruined classical building, the cornice, the scale of the cornice is phenomenal. So one forgets that a little pencil drawing that you saw, is made up of pieces like this. So here is a precast element. You can just see the stooling on which the very beautifully prefabricated piers will sit. And the drainage that is the little hole you see at the top. So the whole thing has to fit together as a massively kind of powerful set of pieces, but then comes to the point where the beams are connected through shear plate connectors from the long span to the stone via the precast unit. So you can see the stubs there that are part of the precast, which become this on the site. In a way, there's a sort of analogy between the making of a sculpture, in a way, and the making of the building, which I find extremely interesting, be it steel, be it stone, or a combination of the two. I think the other thing that I found absolutely compelling about this idea, which Richard will now come on, was the use of a completely different material. As an architect, I find myself extremely touched and moved by the work of sculptors. And tonight is not the night to go through those, but you know, the material obsession that a sculptor brings to his or her work is something that rides on from the architectural position. It just takes it further. But with this, I have to say, and it links into, if the bridge and its stone links through to this, or its parts, then this links to the next building, because it was finding Richard's ceramic work that actually, started a seed of thought that only manifests itself in the next project. But over to you, Richard, because I don't know whether you've got images of the ceramic, but certainly the description of this is very important.
No, but this, what have we got now? Okay, but the idea for these was these were going to be separate ceramic beads. So it was really a bangle or a necklace that was just strung around the building as an adornment, as a kind of veneration, and and yes, Eric's right. They would have been very brightly coloured, and that brings us to the next project, which. So the first one wasn't achieved, and the second one
has not yet been.
The second, well, the building
it's unfinished.
The building sort of doesn't need it. It's a beautiful building. It doesn't need it. So we go on.
What I feel interesting about this last project that we saw is that maybe had it been achieved, there's a kind of tension in it that goes against the structure of the building itself. And I think that it's a collaboration, but at the same time there's something in the visual effect of the sculpture that's meant to celebrate, but at the same time to disturb. And I don't know if you had this feeling or not, because
the two sources I gave you, one is a dead body with a snake around it. And the other is the veneration of Marian shrine. So there's yes, the dead body with the snake around it is a disturbing, but it's to do with the, and I think the connection here is to do with the rigidity of the stone and the way that that kind of muscular curvature both disturbs but also amplifies the stiffness of the stone.
Yeah, well, having got used to that idea, the extraordinary vulnerability in one sense of ceramic seemed to me like the analogy, the metaphor one could draw, kind of Laoconian, and the flesh is exposed within the power of the coil, and I think that the weight of the stone and the ceramic could have been, and still maybe shall be, a wonderful dialogue. This project is, so I'm setting the scene again, because, this was an undertaking which involved reworking this block, which was built over time. This is an amazing image, really, with what was Nash's first Regent Street proposal, so then rebuilt in the 20s at a much grander scale. The sort of establishment of Piccadilly Circus, and then in the 1920s, some architects actually conspired in a way to create very symmetrically, the idea of a boulevard in London, very alien to London, but this is the extraordinary grid of Mayfair, St. James's Square, one of the very early Georgian squares, topped by a Wren church, St. James's Piccadilly, and Piccadilly. It is a very particular quarter of London with a trading street that many will know, Jermyn Street, and then Piccadilly. And you go down Piccadilly, and there was a conversation, and in a way, I think the act of collaboration between architects and artists is one that goes beyond, it's to do with an excitement that goes beyond the pragmatism of planning. But to get a planning consent on this was very difficult. It is described, or I described it certainly, as a piece of urban tooth decay. You know, there's a whole centre here which is unused, a set of buildings, all with their own very different staircases and difficult to access. The question was, this is part of what is known in London as the Crown Estate, so it's a company which is a development company but with a long-term strategy. So the idea was to take these down and to create an office building in this space with residential here and here, and a kind of core at the centre. So that's the bigger architectural problem. It manifested itself, this is what the street was. What you see is here a great variety of buildings. This Cornice is established in the 1920s. It's mirrored on the other side. It doesn't get picked up in this image. This is a wonderful building from the 30s of Emberton, known as Simpson's. And then next to it is a Waterhouse bank from the 1890s. And before that, a building from the 1880s. And then three buildings that are getting back close to the period of Nash. So the conservationists were very determined to keep these. My argument was that there was an unfinished agenda from the architects of the 20s, which was much more important, which was to create, out of this rather shabby territory, a building that would begin to work to the block and to the whole of Piccadilly, because this is Piccadilly Circus at the end. There are a lot of interesting little asides. This Victorian, very eclectic architecture had been destroyed at its base and covered by this marble covering in the 60s, owned by barons. This is Sacha Baron Cohen's alias, his father. So, it's an amazing little world here, and it goes on, many stories within the block. This is my initial sketch, and it's a north-facing elevation. It's very close to the lights of Piccadilly, and I thought that the idea of using a canvas, if you like, of ceramic, of white ceramic, would pick up that light. It would have a kind of haptic quality, and I wanted to pick up the double height order that's very much part of this, and certainly the following architects, to create, therefore to be rather, to continue a dialogue with what is essentially a classical architecture, to recreate the Cornice line. And you can just see here, I'm putting in a blush, so I wanted the facade to be about colour. And I wanted this to be the commission for an artist. And we ran a competition, which Richard won, with already very interesting ideas that then developed into something extraordinary. So effectively, what was very exciting was that in the dialogue was the idea that Richard's sculpture would grow out of the body of the building rather than be something like the last example that was applied, that was threaded or applied. And there is interest in the use of ceramic, because in cast ceramic you take a series of pieces. So whilst there is a complexity vertically with all these returns and so on, once you have the molds you can repeat it, so it gets repeated. It's undoubtedly an expensive building with retail here, and this was even more expensive and perhaps more provocative, in that we took the building you saw on the last slide down, stone by stone, and erected it 6 foot higher in order that these lines would run through. So there's a collage. There's also a new building on the back. And I think it's fair to say Richard started to work on this, and when I took him on his first maybe site visit, it came as quite a surprise to understand that the Cornice was part of a complex urban dialogue that went down this passage into Jermyn Street, and therein lies a difference, I think, between the architect, the urban designer, and the artist. So.
Actually, when Eric first asked me about the Cornice, I did have some ideas, but and then I got really quite stuck. I had no idea how to construct a Cornice. In fact, at one point when very early on, when I saw the things, I thought we got the wrong artist. And Anish Kapoor would do better with this than I could. But Eric was said, no, you're the one that I want, which is nice of him. And somehow things do happen slightly by accident. At some point, this is a photograph from the ceramic studio in Cologne, where I was working one day trying to build these kind of things out of blocks of pre-cut multicolored clay. So these had been fired and then using a saw cut up into these lengths. And I was trying to build structures like this out by interlinking those elements, but unfortunately, these blocks were so heavy that every time I got more than 4 blocks linked together, the whole thing would collapse. And it was a hot summer's day, and after half a day's kind of working like that and continually finding the thing that I was trying to build very delicately crashing around my feet, I began almost in a way of meditating to try and pile the blocks up, used by matching face to face. And like in here you can see. And as I did so, I realized that actually when you saw these piles that I was making, that if I turn the pile on its side, then there was an idea for a profile for the Cornice. So it was a kind of light bulb moment that came out of a rather frustrating day. So, and I don't know how much Eric has moments of unintentionality in his practice, or that fact of material not doing what you wanted to do, but then pushing you in another direction. Then I had an idea for the profiles for the Cornice. The Cornice wouldn't necessarily. There could be different profiles on the Cornice, but I also just had an idea that they would be coloured using coloured clay. So the first ideas used for a pattern on the surface was to use coloured clays, or and these are photographic versions of that of those coloured clays. And that the somehow pattern was also beginning to be a part of of the idea that this is a photograph of a photograph of a piece of rock. So that not only is there a kind of slight geology in the way that the cornice is built, but that geology will be reflected in the exposed faces, each having a different pattern. And the conversation across the facade would be between occurrences of pattern, different profiles linking together, and the ways in which that across the whole length of the facade, repetitions of pattern would also occur. So those, no, that's a good picture. So there, if you see that as one block, then this was the idea. That each block in the cornice would have this kind of geological layer. Now, so that was the colour. So we've got kind of two areas, front on and side on, if you like. I have an idea for how the cornice works side on, how these kind of profiles are built up. Front on, there is a problem that this is cut coloured clay, and at the kind of scale that we're talking about for this cornice, it's not possible to imagine it being coloured. So then the next stage is to kind of think about how, in a kind of glazed way, that colour could be applied, so that these are kind of very early drawings which try to think of that as an applied colour. And at the time, we were investigating having them made in a factory in Holland, who said they could apply the colour in a painted way. So it was up to me to just define how various systems for applying different series of colour to different faces of the cornice. And Eric and the team made the introduction to the factory in Holland, who were also looking at, and they were also looking at producing these ceramic elements for the rest of the facade. However, there was, having got this far down the road, then we had another moment, which is not unlike the bits falling, the piles falling down, in the trial section of the moulded facade was then subject to a what's the word there?
Transfer, right?
No, the stress test.
Oh yeah, right. So it's an impact test.
It was subject to an impact test. An impact test is when they basically swing a big weight, which is equivalent to maybe a window cleaner on a cradle against the facade, and obviously the facade shouldn't crack and shouldn't break, because the people underneath are really going to be in trouble if it does. And there was a catastrophic failure, so that meant that we had to look at a different system of making, and a different system of applying the colour. So these are the drawings now for the various profiles for the corners, and where it's numbered are the ones that might have got selected. So I drew lots and lots of different kinds of profiles for the cornice and selected some of those. And then So now we've got sets of cornices, profiles for cornices. They're actually, these are big blocks, about this high and probably this wide. So these are big things. And each of these faces has a separate colour applied to it. And the big wall of colours that you can see next door, those are the colour patterns that are applied to each of these faces. And they're having failed to get it done by them being painted, by having a team of people painting it, that group of large paintings you see next door then become the, and they're almost one-to-one, the ones next door. They become they're scanned, and then a silkscreen transfer is then applied to the ceramic block after it's been fired for the first time, to produce a set of drawings on the facade. And this is a way of a drawing to indicate that I use. It gets very numerical. I'm a bit. You'd think it was kind of intuitive, but actually it's not. So these are countings for the number of faces on each block. So one has 9, 11. So this is counts the number of. So if you imagine unrolling. Unrolling one of these things, those are this is the cap for each of these of the faces on each block, and then this is on the. This is goes up to 20. It's actually 39 blocks, but these are then the permutations of patterns on the face of each block. So that the reason for doing that like this is to try and ensure that there's no overall, there's no discernible pattern between the things. Although there are points where the areas line up. So it's all and the colours themselves. It's a palette of 7 colours permutated on each of those 35 boards outside. And each one has 3 out of those 7 colours, and there are no repetitions. There's no the same group of 3 doesn't occur more than once. There's enough permutations of 3 out of 7 in order to give you a huge range of possibilities. And this is the finished facade with cornice in place, and Eric should probably now go on to talk about the whole building. So this is where, and actually this is a good photograph, because here's Piccadilly, so you know where you are. And here you can see the various different blocks. And what you get from the side is, so as you come along Piccadilly, as you walk along Piccadilly from the side, actually what you see is the white blocks. And then when you come into the front of it, like this, you get the colour. And then when you come around again, then the colour fades back. You get this kind of again the white white faces of the different profiles emerge. I thought of it as a bit like a score. I thought that the way that patterns work, so that and the reason those notes and those numbers are very like composing in a musical way. In that you get not only you get along the surface, you get a repetition of one a pattern here might repeat here, and so it's not only that you have a sequence up and down, but you also have this sequence across, and the in and out of the front. How we work together on this, I don't want this isn't a me thing. I work very closely with the partnership on the realization and on visiting the site of the manufacturers up in Lancashire, and visiting the first manufacturer in Holland as well, and so that I felt very much that I was part of a team making that was making this facade, so that
maybe if I can.
Yeah, sure.
I've talked a bit. No. It's Eric. How do you view differences between your intervention with color and tiles and this kind of things that are not strictly structural but have to do with images? Even more, I mean, I would say it's really images, because this reddish aspect is pretty strong compared to what Richard has been doing. Do you see a different way of thinking about that, or do you see some similar ways and you're just collaborating on the building in that manner?
Yeah, thank you. It's obviously there are certain things that are there as a basis. One is the use of ceramic. I saw so this is actually the whole structure of the facade has to be made as something very stiff, so that the ceramic is actually laid in mortar. It is not a rain screen. I did, if you look at the drawing outside actually, which predates Richard's involvement, I had seen the cheeks of these windows as something much less mechanistic. But once Richard was on board, it became absolutely clear to me that these needed actually to be technical. They bleed through a frit, so the full colour bleeds out. If you go back to that perspective, you see that that's what I was trying to do. But rather than this being the hand of an artist, it becomes a crafted surface. The idea of the polychromatic was absolutely as a basis of this. Having worked through ceramic with crafted finishes that are the glaze applied by hand, this was to be quite the opposite. It was to be an investigation of artifice. And it's very interesting at the end that this extraordinary piece is named by Richard Piccadilly. This is about Piccadilly Circus. It's not a building that could go anywhere. It's about context. And it is, in the end, the top, in my mind, the black and the white and the red. I had the idea of a made-up face. Unlike stone, this was something that was touched. It was to reinforce the artificiality of the proposition, polychromatic proposition, at the top of the building. And in that respect, there's a little bit of change as the process moves between, you know, I think within this is for me an extraordinary amount of a sense of trust, but also of unknown. The thing about ceramic, unlike stone, you know, you cut a block of stone, you know what you're dealing with effectively through the proximity of other stones. With the whole process of ceramic is something that is created artificially, and I think that's most interesting for this position. And that's probably as far as I would go in response. There's an ordering of the facade in terms of the proportions and the base, you know, which plays with the background, classical background, and then it's a journey which was not defined and was extraordinary in the sense of uncertainty in my mind of what the impact ultimately would be.
Eric started this talk with an image from London Bridge and talked a bit about how badly London treated its bridges and what you have here is a bit of heaving process on the frontage of Piccadilly. The project that was never achieved with neither the bridge but this in Finsbury Square, you have a very beautiful building which I wanted to celebrate. Here we have behind this, there's an office floor that runs through from the building. So these are facades. They're not. There isn't a building that corresponds to this facade. Actually, there's a continuation behind it. So the street is kind of healed, although the behind acknowledges the particularity of commercial developments and the needs for commercial space. The next project that we do together should be a standalone building or structure which has both front and back.
That was a conclusion, was it? No, it's a perfect conclusion, I think. I think if you open questions to the floor, actually, if anyone has questions. How do we
often come out by both of you distinctively. The planning is a constant and frequent word in architecture. And an interesting word was the unintentionality, while you were explaining, Mr. Deacon, the fact that the art process often comes back and proceeds by mistakes, collapse after collapse, and the artist tries to find an alternative to the collapse, whereas the architect, by planning, skips the mistakes and prevents the mistakes. So my question is, by working so closely together in these years, did the two aspects somehow influence each other? The planning mentality, did it ever or somehow influence the artist, and the other way around? If somehow this unintentionality of art somehow affected your way to conceive your architectural work, and just to end this question, but also to maybe that the metaphor of the snake is very useful, because somehow the snake skips the fact that it doesn't have a skeleton, so art maybe has not the strong fundamentals, but somehow the skin, like here, or like in the corners, or like in the first works we saw, kind of permanently renovating itself, whereas maybe the skeleton and the corpse that we saw in the painting, it is still, but it's a corpse. So I understood that this was a kind of provocative question that art was asking for architecture. This is only consideration, it's not a question.
I think Eric can answer that as well. The other idea that Eric introduced, right at the Eric Chassis introduced at the beginning, was to do with structure. So underneath all of those conversations, there is something about structure as being structure may well be planning, providing somehow that although it's not necessarily doesn't necessarily determine the outcome, but the possibilities of structure are something that we have to that drives things forward. I think in Piccadilly, in this thing, there were two kinds of mistakes, two kinds of failures, both of which drove things forward. The first kind of failure was purely studio-based one, of being in the studio and finding things falling down around my ears all the time. I tried to build something, and then somehow that pushing me into making something. And the second failure was within entirely within this business of making buildings, when you subject something to a stress test and it catastrophic failure, and so then you do have to go. Then it wasn't me. It was the whole team had to go back and not redesign. Well, to a certain extent redesign, but certainly rethink how to proceed. And I mean, I think there's a whole failure in architecture is quite a tricky area, because it can hurt. But also, it's I mean, for me, failure is kind of often a way that drives things forward. So, I mean, but it'd be interesting to know from Eric's point of view how much failure would also. And he actually, Eric did make the point in relationship to the bridge, the Millennium Bridge that has been built, how its failure, because it wasn't, did provoke an opportunity for Arabs to have developed a whole new range of engineering solutions, which have then become, that's not possible to benefit from the failure, but Arabs have benefited from that failure.
Yeah, well, I think the first point actually I would pick up is the assumption there's a kind of safety in this segregation. So Eric's point at the beginning that the assumption is that artists, are polluted, in terms of their work by engaging with architects is an interesting one, because I think that's become the norm. Whereas it seems to me that if you roll back, the history of making environments, whether they're interiors or buildings, in fact, it is almost of continuous collaboration. And the question in my mind is actually in the collaboration, in the risk, there is the potential of the things that Richard's just been talking about, which is the discovery of innovation, of a kind of a new horizon that was not there before. So the amazing ceramics ceramics that Richard had been producing could not exist externally. They could not be part of a history of building ceramics, just because of the firing process and the technical things that we're not going into tonight. But therefore, the sort of stepping over the boundary into a production that comes from the tradition of Bangle ceramic, or building ceramics and faience, opened up new perspectives, both in terms of the object, but its manifestation as part of something larger. I have to say that where I would take I would be in some disagreement with Richard, was this idea of separation and autonomy. It has driven us, to the position now that every building of any kind of civic kind has to be standalone, has to be, it has to be a statement and an individual statement. That seems to me to be absolutely counter to all our understanding of what the city is really about, which is about places, whether they're squares or streets. And I have a great interest in being, therefore, dubbed, if you like, the repairman. In fact, I call myself that, in terms of urban repair, because there is an extraordinary dismissal of some of the finer calibrations of what a facade can do to a street, by the inflection of a line, by color, by scaling, when it's understood as a greater part. So I actually see the process of facade as something, with huge significance and not given actually enough prominence. And I also think that the building behind is, when you look at it as you walk around the block of streets, it's an office, it's shops, it's housing, it's a multiplicity. So that idea of mixed use repair, which allows the calibration of ultimately the street to work, seems to me to be extremely interesting aspect that's been long dismissed, actually. And on top of that, I think what this project, I hope, does, in terms of its location, is denies the fact that that process of given depth and expense, because this is not cheap. So I think there's a real irresponsibility in the way we make buildings as through a kind of set of internationalized generic parts that deny craftsmanship, deny the particular, and are, of course, the good bottom line for the developer, because they can be built, extraordinarily cheaply. So I have a kind of, real anger about the way the city is kind of treated, and I think that there's no reason when you go as far as you can as an architect. That's only the launching pad, if you like, for the artist, and I think the two combined can do extraordinary things.
Maybe I want to add that there's also, if you look at both works, they're autonomous works, in the long run, there's a strong element of planning in Richard's work. One of his first major works was these series of drawings which nearly look like blueprint. One's called It's Orpheus When They're Singing, from 78, 79. And when you look at Eric's practice for a very long time, it has this element of serendipity in it, because he's actually working with existing building. I mean, it's been very clear in all the explanation he's been giving. But that's not only for this building. It's when you call yourself the repairman, it means also that you're taking care of what's already there and that you can't plan. I mean, it's there, you have to work with it. It introduces a whole set of surprises, things that you wouldn't want when you're working on a standalone building or things like that. So I think that it's also, that's why the conversation seems so rich. It's also because it actually grows from autonomous practices also, which are not contradictory. I don't know whether I'm right or not, but I have this strong feeling. Is there another question?
Hello. You made much of the cornice fitting into the continuation of the cornices of buildings on either side. I was struck from this picture of the variegated profiles of your cornice and indeed the double width, the double height rather, of the blush windows, if you like, reflecting the dogtooth cornice opposite and those double height windows. And I wondered whether that was deliberate, that you were looking on the other side of the street, not just on either side as the continuous elevation, or whether that was serendipity.
No, it was very, very much. I come across this other architect on the other side. This is, belonged to on many, many occasions. He was a very strident voice, and yeah, it's not. I think it's striking when you get to the top how much richness there is out here. So the scaffolding, it's quite amazing when you look back across this at the kind of work that's up there. Then you just never take it. You just take it for granted. It's just there, but it's part of the kind of experience of Piccadilly. So yeah, the double order is very much that. It's actually it's perhaps more to do with the double order that you can just figure out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's in a way unfinished business. The next block has this brilliant modernist building on it, Simpsons, and so it's a role. I think it's interesting to be partaking in an adventure that was Piccadilly.
Maybe one last question, or more than one last question. One last question.
Well, mine is a very easy one. I wonder, do you have another picture of the same frame, but with people walking along Piccadilly? Because what I find really striking is that, as you said yourself, the cornice is site-specific in the way it couldn't be anywhere else. And I agree that sort of the variety of colors and shapes makes me think of what you usually have on the pavement in terms of people and in terms of movement, and how this is almost a reflection at the top of the building of what's going on on the street level. That's how I see it, at least. And it's funny that the picture here is probably taken at 5 in the morning on a summer day, because I've never, or no one has ever seen Piccadilly.
You're right. But outside, and it's unfinished, this project. But if you go outside, there's a very interesting image, I think, which is kind of taken at, with 800 ASA and a long focal lens, just that picks up the opposite. So it sets the building from the ground, and that's very much as it is seen. I mean, it is. I think it's interesting. People have approached me just to say that, oh, yeah, well, it's actually sitting there, with great ease. It's kind of being accepted in an interesting way. And behind this, of course, is a very interesting, the question of polychromy and what a classical kind of cornice and entablature was, and it's and that whole sort of going back to Hittorf and the polychromy campaign is very, very interesting. But I see this as, I don't know how Richard does, but I see it as the most amazing, fecund kind of blossoming and sort of joy at this point. It is extraordinary how it, as a process, worked from those colorways to the scaling of this. So it's, the people are there as well.
Actually, the light works best at about 6 or 7 o'clock on a summer's evening. The morning's not so good. The light doesn't quite kind of hit it, but the orientation is the street. On a summer's evening, the light is really very good on it. This is quite an early. Well, yes, I do have other images of it with people, and traffic management in Piccadilly is quite good because there are spaces between the. It doesn't get clogged. Piccadilly does move, so the even at midday you don't get traffic standstill in Piccadilly, and there are spaces in between the traffic where you can see it. It was a very nice view from this point here. When you come, this is where the old Tower Records was. When you come out of the subway there, and you look up, it's a very nice view. But also, a lot of tourists will stand over here and take the picture of Eyre, and it's in the background. It will be in, seems to be in London in a way that I really like.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to Eric and Richard in particular. Just reminding you that next time we have an art historian speaking, so which means architect and artist combined somehow. I don't know. That's the idea of what we Cohen. So that again has something different. So I'm happy about it. Thanks a lot.